Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janine Adams. I'm from the Nelson Mandela University, and today I'm going to speak on the restoration of South Africa's estuaries. This is the second talk in a series that we're doing on Monday, covering various topics related to the conservation and management of South Africa's estuaries. So in South Africa, we're fortunate to have a diversity of types of estuaries. We have 290 estuaries. These are the meeting place of land and sea and are extremely important for the delivery of multiple ecosystem services. Why restoration? Well, the UN has declared that 2021 to 2030 will be the decade of ecosystem restoration. And here we define restoration as the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been damaged, destroyed, or degraded. And that's the Society of Ecological Restoration definition. So the partners to the Ramsar Convention are calling on a specific program on wetland restoration, and this would also include estuaries. These partners come from a variety of international organizations, and they're consisting of WWF, IUCN, Wetlands International, and others, as you can see on the left-hand side. And they've identified that by restoring, conserving, and wisely using our wetlands, we can contribute towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 different goals, but in particular we're talking about 14, which is life below water, where it says we need to sustainably manage and protect marine and coastal ecosystems by strengthening their resilience and taking action for their restoration in order to achieve healthy and productive oceans. Oceans and coasts and estuaries would also fall underneath there. In South Africa, we have a blueprint for estuary management, and that is our National Estuary Management Protocol. And the objective there is that the estuaries of South Africa are managed in a sustainable way that benefits the current and future generations. And one of the objectives is to maintain or restore the ecological integrity of South Africa's estuaries. And this must be done through ecological interactions, both between estuaries and with the catchment and other ecosystems. So in order to produce the ecosystem services that we are dependent on, we need healthy estuaries. And these photos show a variety of activities occurring in estuaries. They're important for bait collection. They're naturally biodiverse areas. They serve as nursery habitats for important fish species, both recreational and commercially important fish. They serve as sites of cultural importance. Very traditional ceremonies take place. They also have aesthetic qualities. A lot of recreational activities take place in estuaries. And they have important regulating services such as flood and erosion control and carbon storage. So how do we know in South Africa if our estuaries are healthy or not? For about the last 3 decades, we have been applying the Estrarine Health Index. And this Estrarine Health Index rates each and every estuary in the country from an A to an F, where an A is an estuary in excellent condition and an F is a system that is extremely degraded. And this has been applied to all estuaries. The most recent information can be found in the National Biodiversity Assessment of the South African National Biodiversity Institute. There's a whole report, separate report on estuaries. And if we look at the health of South Africa's estuaries around the coast, we can see where our degraded systems are, where our healthy estuaries are. Of course, we mostly find estuaries in a poor condition around the urban centres. So if we want to initiate a restoration plan for the country, we know which estuaries are unhealthy, where they occur, and we can drill down even further onto a per estuary basis. For example, this is Swartkops. We can look at the components of the Estrarine Health Index. Here we have the abiotic and the biotic components. And we can see what the condition of each of these is and what the intervention might be. So for example, in the Swartkops, the water quality is in a very poor condition, And to improve that, you need to reduce the inputs of bacteria, toxins, and plastics. Because the water quality is so poor, for example, that translates into other impacts on the biota. So microalgae, it's a eutrophic estuary, you need to reduce nutrient inputs. So these are the components of the Estuarine Health Index, and this slide is to show that if we have this information for each estuary, we can immediately go and identify what restoration actions are needed to improve estuary health. So in our country, we have a diversity of estuary types, and we were using Whitfield's classification for many years, and this was updated in a publication that came out this year, where we have a few new terms. Estuarine bays remain, estuarine lagoons have been added, we only have Langebaan. Wilderness, we have a number of estuarine lakes, wilderness as an example there. We've got fluvially dominated estuaries. These used to be called river mouths, so now we have large fluvially dominated and small fluvially dominated estuaries. This is a size divide over here. We've got predominantly open estuaries, those that are permanently open to the sea, so they used to be called permanently open. And now we have large and small predominantly closed systems. And the other one, yeah, large temporary open, large temporary closed estuaries would be our other classification. So the biggest change that can happen in an estuary is to change its type, and we do have some examples of this. So here's the various estuaries in the country, what the natural type was in terms of its classification, what the functional type is now, how it has been changed, and what that driver of change was. So a number of lakes have undergone changes. For example, Searkoy, it was an estuarine lake and it's now predominantly open, and this is because of mouth manipulation and developmental impacts. Algal was a predominantly open estuary, it's now a large temporary closed system, and this was because of farm dams in the catchment. This reduced freshwater input to the estuary and caused the mouth to close. And so we go on for a number of other types. Besides flow reduction, we can also have flow increase. So for example, the Estran and the silver mine, they were both large temporary closed, but they're now, for example, Estran, it's an open system because it gets excess flow from wastewater treatment works. The Soat, the Barkens and the Paardenkels outside Port Elizabeth, these two used to be small temporary closed systems. They're now open because they've been canalized. Training walls, hard engineering structures have been created to keep them open to the sea. And thus the main driver of change is mouth manipulation and development. So going on to some restoration case studies in our country. We have had some restoration interventions. And this is just a map showing the ones that I'll speak about, the Orange River Mouth, the Sunfla and the Great Bruck. And there are a number of other examples though, and mostly the pressure on these systems has been changes in freshwater inflow, urbanization, agricultural impacts or mining impacts. So we go to the Orange River Mouth. This is an aerial photograph showing the Orange River Mouth in August 1937. We're lucky in South Africa that our aerial photographs can go back to about 1937 or 1942. This is the sea over here and the river would be up here. And this area is a large marsh area that was connected to the main river by these channels you can see here. The Orange River Mouth is the largest river in South Africa. It's one of our major water supply systems. And since this date, there's been a lot of impacts on the estuary. There's also was a mining town, Alexandra Bay, that was developed here. And part of that, they built a road or a causeway that disconnected the river from this marsh area with subsequent impacts. So these are some more recent photographs. So what happened after that causeway was constructed, and this, you can see the causeway in this left-hand photograph, the main river, the Orange River Mouth, and the desertified marsh area. This area was disconnected from the freshwater inflow in the main channel, and it basically became hypersaline, the west coast receiving less than 50 millimeters of rain per annum. Once an estuary is salinized or a marsh habitat is salinized, it's very difficult to get it back to natural vegetation. This is also a Ramsar site, a wetland of international importance. because it occurs on the dry, arid west coast, so it was an important migratory stopover spot for birds. And so, because the status of the system deteriorated so, it was placed on the Montreux record as a threatened habitat, and its ecological character therefore needs to be restored. Quite a long time ago now, we were involved in the Orange River Mouth rehabilitation, and this was also working with the Working for Wetlands program, which still continues today. And the idea there was to provide people with work, with jobs, and they could start removing parts of the causeway so that the main river could be reconnected with the river channel. So besides those and some earlier interactions, what we see here is that the mouth area, the freshwater inflow, became connected to the main river channel, and active planting of plants wasn't needed as there was a natural regeneration. The connection of the water restored the freshwater inflow to this area, and you can see by the green salt marsh that that area became rehabilitated. The slide shows other sites along the causeway that we identified for removal. So what happened is that the Working for Water intervention ran out of money, ran out of manpower, and the marsh is still largely desertified today. And so we were very pleased to hear that this initiative has been restarted, and our old diagrams that we developed of where to make a break in the causeway and connect the river to the marsh is still valid. And so we're hoping that there will be some interventions there soon to improve the health of the orange. So if we summarize the Orange River Mouth case study, the drivers were urban causeway, dams, mining. There was reduced freshwater inflow, no tidal exchange to the system, and it became dry and hypersaline. The ecological state was that 300 hectares of salt marsh was lost, and the area became desertified. That loss of vegetation cover also led to a loss of wind-blown sand, and this wind-blown sand covered the remaining vegetation, so it's very difficult to get plants to grow in such an unstable saline environment. What was the restoration activity that took place? The causeway was breached, but only near the mouth, and it actually needs to be completely removed in order to allow rehabilitation of this area. And so the success has been very low, and the salt marsh is not re-established to the area cover that it used to have. But this case study certainly provides a good opportunity for future intervention. So the next case study I'll talk about is Sunfla. Sunfla is an urban system occurring in the city of Cape Town near Muizenberg. Its pressure has been water level regulation and nutrient loading. So under the natural state, this system actually used to receive less water. It used to dry out as a seasonal plan. But now, because of all the surrounding and development and runoff, it actually has a permanent water body. But with that water comes a lot of nutrients, pollution, inputs from storm water that cause a water quality problem. And so part of the impact as well was that the system now, the mouth would close, there would be poor water quality, there was big eutrophication, harmful algal blooms, and fish kills over the years. So the restoration activity, and this was carried out by the city of Cape Town, was to actively manage the mouth area by artificial breaching. So breaching the mouth here to the sea on a regular basis. And what this did is it allowed tidal exchange, saline water to come into the system, and that diluted nutrients, and it prevented eutrophication and the development of harmful algal blooms. So as a restoration activity, the success of this can be identified as medium. There was tidal influence, there's been some restoration of activities. But this case study is also a very good one to show strategic adaptive management in action. The city of Cape Town actively managing the system, ensuring and measuring nutrient concentrations in the system and what's going out. Although the system is not managed according to what it would have looked like naturally in terms of its ecological state, it's managed to ensure that water quality is maintained, because this is an important residential area as well as a recreational area. There's a lot of sailing and boating, and people want a high water level, so the mouth is managed to obtain that. Another system where the locals, the stakeholders, and strategic adaptive management was indeed in action was a Great Bruck Estuary case study, where here we identified the spread of an invasive alien grass, Spartana alterniflora. This plant is an ecosystem engineer. It forms a very dense root mass and it outcompetes all native vegetation. We sent this plant overseas for genetic analysis, and our American colleague there said, get it out of your estuary as soon as possible. It took a while, and we documented the spread, but it was eventually completely removed from the Great Bruck Estuary. And so this is an example of an intervention that was very successful and is actually the first national prospect of eradication of an invasive alien plant in South Africa. This was a close working relationship with SANBI. They took control of the management of this issue. They organized the chemical control of this grass. This is what it looked like in 2013. And by 2017, after chemical spraying, the natural indigenous salt marsh had come back. And now in 2020, that grass no longer occurs there. So it was an eradication, a successful case study of a removal of an alien plant. And this happened because of interaction between a number of people, and specifically our university working with SANBI, as well as the Working for Water program. So if we move on to some other estuaries where there certainly have been restoration activities, we've got St. Lucia, Zikhwefle, Isipingo in KwaZulu-Natal, Siyaye in KwaZulu-Natal, and Ngobezheleni. I won't go through the details of what the pressure, the state, the impact, the activity has been, but if we just look at the degree of success, it's mostly low to medium. And so this calls for a different approach. Most restoration interventions have been ad hoc and unsuccessful, and we now need a coordinated national effort where there's adequate human and financial resources, and we're calling for a national estuary restoration and research program. Research must go with it so that we can have action research. Activities can be implemented and we can monitor success. And we're calling for a socio-ecological systems approach for the restoration of estuaries and the delivery of multiple ecosystem services. Only looking at the ecological subsystem, but we're connecting it to the human subsystem through the socio-ecological systems approach, considering actions and interventions and ecosystem goods and services. A healthy ecosystem produces the ecosystem goods and services that we're dependent on as humans. And so we're doing some research at the Swartkops Estuary. It's close to our university, so it provides good training opportunities and research projects for postgraduate students. And also it's a good restoration opportunity. It's currently in a present ecological status of a D. And to improve the estuary's health status to a C, we need to improve water quality, manage boating, reduce fishing and bait collection, take the pressure off the resources. And a lot of habitat has been removed because of development. So there's a need to rehabilitate both salt marsh and desertified salt pan areas. So we have a number of postgraduate students working on this program, looking at the restoration of the salt pans, looking at innovative methods for water quality improvement. There's already an artificial wetland at Motherwell, so we want to enhance the capability of that. We have a student looking at the Markman Canal and how to treat stormwater using a treatment train. So to take the water running off in the stormwater canals and to treat it before it reaches the estuary. What are innovative methods applied to that? We're looking at the salt marsh as a filter. The natural habitats play a very important role in water quality control. They sequester and they store heavy metals, but at what point does that become a threshold? Harmful algal blooms or HABs, they also take up a lot of nutrients and they act as a natural filter. So we're looking at their functions. And this project on the restoration of the Swartkops Estuary, we're very thankful to funding from the Water Research Commission on these research studies. The Swartkops showed a deterioration in health already this year, and a harmful algal bloom occurred there that we haven't seen in the Swartkops before. It's occurred in the Sundays Estuary, but not the Swartkops. And it caught the residents' attention and also the local press with a story in our Herald and the Daily Dispatch, because it turns this harmful algal bloom, which is a Heterosigma akishiwo, it turns the water black and it almost looks like an oil spill. But this is one unicellular algae that's causing this color decoloration in the water. And why does it occur there? It's because of nutrients. And in the Swartkops, the nutrients come from 3 wastewater treatment works upstream. So until we control that input, we could see more harmful algal bloom species occurring. Why is it harmful? Well, in the area that it occurs, it grows, it decays, and then the decay process takes up a whole lot of oxygen. The waters become anoxic, and those mobile animals, the fish and invertebrates that can move away do, or others that are trapped in that area die. So it's harmful algal bloom. We don't know yet. The species doesn't seem to have any specific toxins, but some harmful algal blooms, they do have toxins that show direct toxicity to humans and estuary life. So our other research is looking at blue carbon ecosystems and restoration. Blue carbon habitats are mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marsh habitats. And globally, there's interest in blue carbon habitats because they store a lot of carbon. So restoration for carbon storage and climate change mitigation is very important. And our research will be looking at restoration and climate change. In particular, you need to look at the past restoration activities, the current state of the system, the climate variability, and together with the restoration action, will that indeed lead to a restored ecosystem in the future? So for example, if we take, this is the Neisner estuary, in most of our coastal habitats and particularly estuaries, there's a lot of development already around the system. And with sea level rise, which will happen with climate change, these estuarine habitats of salt marshes and seagrasses, they can move inland with water level increases. But if you have a lot of hard engineering and infrastructure there, what you get is coastal squeeze, and there's nowhere for these habitats to move. So part of our research is investigating climate change, coastal squeeze, sea level rise, and what's going to happen in the future, and where should we be putting our restoration attention in order to conserve important salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses as blue carbon habitats. Another area of research is Estrarine Lakes. Estrarine Lakes are, out of all of the South Africa's estuary types, they are the most threatened. Here's a list of our different lake systems. And their strategic program is needed to restore health so that this can provide ecosystem service such as flood regulation, nutrient cycling, fish nursery habitat, and recreational and tourism opportunities. So we're looking at estuary lake responses to climate change and future activities and options for restoration of these important estuaries in South Africa. Also regionally, working in the Waiya, the Western Indian Ocean region, there are 2 PhD students that are looking at the restoration of seagrasses, both in Mozambique and Tanzania. They're looking at status, restoration, and how these meadows influence coastal protection and biodiversity and shoreline protection. So if you take these habitats away, they play a very important role in attenuating wave action. If you remove them, then you expose your shoreline to erosion. With all of these activities, restoration needs a framework. And so we've come up with this preliminary socio-ecological systems framework for restoration, which occurs in a strategic adaptive management cycle. So you would have a restoration goal. From that would stem a management action. You would go about implementing that and monitoring. And you connect it to the estuary state by our Estuarine Health Index. So the restoration activity and intervention should improve estuary health. That is then linked to the state of the societal system by understanding how does estuary health influence ecosystem services, such as the estuary as a filter, carbon storage, the estuary as a flood buffer for bank protection and a fish nursery habitat. And how does this influence the state of the societal system in terms of human well-being and human benefits and values? So we take in this socio-ecological systems framework and we are testing it on firstly the Swartkops estuary and then seeing if it can be applied nationally. There are other systems out there, such as the ecosystem recovery wheel, that's used to document progress in restoration activities. Here for ecosystem health, they would look at species composition, structural diversity, ecosystem function, external exchanges, and absence of threats. And this is a wheel because it's got the different spokes, and you can document over time how these parameters would improve in condition with restoration activities. So we take in the same concept but applying it to our ecosystem or estuary health index. This can also use such a wheel to track the societal benefits. So from restoration, you should also be improving community well-being, stakeholder engagement, benefits and the distribution of those benefits, knowledge enrichment, and restoring natural capital. And you can use the same wheel approach to track progress in achieving that with restoration and specific management intervention. So these are based on the principles from the Society for Ecological Restoration. They put together 8 international principles and standards for the practice of ecological restoration. And this is an international organization. So what is being developed here is input from a number of countries around the world. And last year we were fortunate to attend the Society for Ecological Restoration's 8th World Conference on Ecological Restoration in Cape Town. And here they launched the 2nd edition of the International Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. So we also want to look at those principles and apply it in estuary management and see how we can tailor make them. But the principles are fairly general: to engage stakeholders, to draw on many types of knowledge, and this is where indigenous knowledge comes in, to be informed by the native reference ecosystems. So with estuaries, we always understand what is the change from natural. How did that estuary function in its natural condition, and how does it function now? And that is its Estran Health Index score. The principle 4 is that restoration should support ecosystem recovery processes, so that you're always ensuring natural recovery of the system. And principle 5 is that restoration should be assessed against clear goals and objectives, using measurable indicators. And that is so that using those indicators, you can come up with this idea of the ecological recovery wheel. This, for example, and just looking at the colors, I know you won't be able to read the text, but this was the baseline condition, and this was 10 years later after some restoration activities were implemented. And you can see the improvement using the wheel and spoke approach here in the conditions. So principle 6 is that restoration should seek the highest level of ecosystem recovery possible and should gain a cumulative value when applied at large scales. And then the last principle, principle 8, is that restoration is part of a continuum of restorative activities. And so firstly, you would want to reduce impacts. You would then want to apply some remediation measures. You would move into rehabilitation and repairing ecosystem function. You would then initiate, partially recover, and fully recover some of the native ecosystems. And this is known as the restorative continuum. So in South Africa, we look forward to the restoration of South Africa's estuaries, and this provides lots of opportunities. It provides opportunities for innovation. It provides opportunities for transdisciplinary research, as we can work with a lot of different disciplines. So many of you who are conducting your research towards your postgraduate studies, we know that your research will find application in a national estuary restoration and research program. This provides opportunities for action research, a learning by doing approach in the strategic adaptive management cycle. So with that note, I'd like to say thank you very much. Please follow us on social media. We have a Facebook site as well as Twitter, which you can contribute to. And I would like to thank the funders, National Research Foundation for the Saatchi Chair in Shallow Water Ecosystems, and then also the Water Research Commission. Thank you.